Well, welcome to this discussion on the Canada option for UK Res Non-Doms. We're going to bring to you a practical hour ahead that uses a variety of case studies to illustrate some of the key planning points. Delighted to be joined by Jonathan Garbett and Karen Howley. Welcome to you both.
Hi, David. Thanks for having us.
So, Jonathan, you did a great presentation on the Canada option as part of High Net Worth Advisors London conference last year. I'm looking forward to you sharing some more thoughts today. But for people not familiar with your practice, perhaps tell us about the type of clients you advise, the type of work you do.
I'm a Canadian tax lawyer. I do Canadian tax trusts and estates. However, a large portion of my practice deals with people crossing borders, money crossing borders, but one of those borders has to be Canada. So anything inbound or outbound from Canada is generally sort of my roundhouse, and that's what I practice.
Fantastic. And Karen, what about yourself? What do you focus on?
So our primary focus is Canadian immigration law. So a little bit like Jonathan, I deal with people moving borders, not so much with the money side, but certainly with the individuals from around the world who want to come and make Canada either a temporary home or a permanent home. So that's what we do a lot of here.
Fantastic. And Jonathan, I mean, why do you think the timing is right now? I mean, there's changes afoot in the UK. We're about to complete this tax year and enter a new era for non-doms. What do you think on a high level is the opportunity here for advisors with clients sat in the UK?
Well, as you said, the end of the non-dom era means that people who've had a great, shall we say, a very inexpensive place to live for a very long time, all of a sudden the UK is not going to be as inexpensive from a tax perspective for people with certain types of assets, certain family configurations, in terms of who owns what. And it's time, as many of those families are sort of looking at their options and trying to figure out what exactly it is that they're going to be doing going forward. And so, we wanted to present Canada as an option. One of the things that happened was that when at this presentation last year, Henley, that is a major global firm that does a lot of high net worth immigration, noted that, Canada was the fourth most popular country for high net worth individuals to move to, and would, as far as they could tell in 2024, with a very large number, they said 4,200, very wealthy people were moving to Canada. And so it seems like this is something that is happening and is being considered by global families. And we just wanted to sort of highlight that option to people in the UK who hadn't really thought about it, because it's not exactly obvious. It takes you have to sort of think through what is exactly the family wealth configuration, how the money is made, where it's made, what kind of asset mix they have, and then compare that to the actual family members that you have and what is in their best interest. And I think, we'll go through this, and I'll leave this up to Karen, but the difference between Canada and the other options is the availability of a path to citizenship, which
Hmm.
is simply not available for many of the other options that the non-doms are considering. And as a consequence, if you can have a good tax treatment, far better than you think you would probably get, and maybe even for some families better than the UK, which is not something that they had thought, than the non-dom. Technically, if it's the right form of wealth, right way of holding the wealth, and a path to citizenship, that's a winning combination for families, particularly for families that have mobility issues. They just can't move around as freely as they would like to. They've been fine while they were in the UK, but now's the time to think about what is the long-term sort of, and given the way that the complexity and difficulties of the world, being able to move and being able to go where you want to is not only quote good for, not only good for business, but also sort of an important aspect of the family's overall sort of, um, shall we say, just emergency planning, just
Hmm.
what happens if. And wealthy families are very concerned about what happens if. Where can you go? Where can the family, move to, and that would be safe and good for them in the long term. So that's what we're trying to address here. And so, if you have families that are in that situation, then Canada is an option. Canada is really an option.
Fantastic. Well,
Yeah,
look,
and
oh, go on, Karen.
yeah, no, I think it's really interesting actually. I think Canada is the overlooked big sister in the room a lot of the time, right? So it's something that is quietly sitting here in a very little safe part of the world. And I think it's now time, it's due its fair turn to really consider it as a viable option for families who want to move.
Fantastic. We've got our Q&A open, so I'm going to keep an eye on that. But Karen and Jonathan are going to walk us through a variety of case studies. Karen, if you want to fire up the slides now,
Sure.
then
Yeah, I can do that.
we can get into the materials because there's some terrific examples here that really illustrate the use case. So if you
Okay,
want to take it away, I'll keep an eye on the Q&A.
wonderful. Is everybody able to see my screen? We're
Perfect.
sharing. Okay, excellent, great. So yeah, we'll run through these as quickly as we can. Obviously, if there's questions that do pop in as we are discussing it, please feel free to interrupt us because we're happy to have a chat in between. So yeah, today's presentation is on Canada, a tax efficient option for UK non-doms. And if I could do this now. Here we go.
Yeah.
Jonathan, do you want to give a little bit of a background on you before we kick off?
Yeah, well, I'm pretty happy with what I said before, so let's just keep going.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay.
So,
Yeah, you covered all that. So yeah,
I think your story is kind of interesting though. I think you need to
oh,
do a little bit more about how you came to live in Red Deer, Alberta, which happens to be my original hometown, the little town that I grew up in,
sure.
is where you live right now. So
Yeah, okay. Well, no problem. So my name is Karen Howley. I am predominantly a Canadian immigration lawyer. In a past life, though, I was an immigration lawyer in the UK, where I worked in London with some large and regional law firms. We focused a lot on the British and European immigration law, and we did a lot with high net worth families. But my own journey was slightly different. So my husband was an electrician, and we started looking into moving to Canada. And I kind of thought it was pretty funny. I was like, listen, sweetheart, I was like, I'm going to be way more attractive to this country. I'm a lawyer, blah, blah, blah. And sure enough, we went to a couple of conferences and different things about how do we immigrate to Canada. And every place we went to told me that you can forget it. I'm not the key. He is, because he had a trade. So I was basically told you'd be lucky to be accompanying this individual to Canada. So as much and all as I thought my degree, my education and my work experience were going to help me out, we moved to Canada on the back of the electrician's trade. 10, 11 years later, my husband is also a significant part of the business that we're doing now. So take that, advisors. This is the route I came on. So yeah, something similar, but it's a little bit different for everybody. About 7 years ago, we went out on our own, creating an immigration firm predominantly, which services clients globally from a small town, a small community in Alberta. I say small town, so having lived in London in the UK for a number of years, we then moved to Red Deer, which is a community of about 100,000 people. And honestly, sometimes it feels like it's a community of 1,000 people. There's a beauty in that. And I'm one of the lucky lawyers here who gets to live locally, but practice internationally. So there you go. That's a short stop on what we do. So today, here's a little bit of what we're going to cover. The concept is that we're going to talk quite a bit throughout these slides, and really the slides are here just for a navigation and a point of reference for everybody. We're going to look at the current situation with UK non-doms, why you should consider Canada as an option for these families, maybe say a lot or a little what's going on with our neighbour. And then how do we get to Canada? How do we stay here? How do we transition to permanent residence and onwards? Really, what does that mean from a tax perspective? And then let's look at some scenarios and see how does that ring a bell for anybody that you know. So, Jonathan, here you go.
okay. So this is really where we are, and I can't help but realize the songs, but I won't sing it. This is the issue: is should they stay or should they go?
Yeah.
And if they go, there's gonna be complications and trouble. But if they stay, they're gonna pay a lot of tax. And I think that there's a lot of families who are really considering that. And I don't mean to. I'm being facetious, but it's like all of the other countries are not the UK, and they have very specific issues. Switzerland is Switzerland. Like, unless you're very Swiss, Switzerland can be difficult to live in unless you're very Swiss in your mentalities.
Yeah.
Monaco is very expensive and small. Malta and Cyprus, see Switzerland. The U.S. estate tax is a very bad thing if you happen to be a wealthy family, and it doesn't seem to be going away. We don't know what's going on with a lot of things in the U.S., but there seems to be a lot of complexity going on and a lot of issues in the U.S. right now. So the U.S. is maybe not at the top of the agenda for a lot of families, wealthy families with global wealth. But there are lots of issues. Um, Italy and Greece and all these other countries have these golden visas, but those golden visas do not have a pathway to citizenship. You're just not going to be able to become a citizen. And, some countries do have citizenship by birth. So, next generation, third generation might become citizens, but that's a very long pathway to citizenship that is just and in Canada, we're not saying that it's easy or that citizenship can be purchased or it's something that you can just acquire. It is a process, not a product, very much a long, drawn out process, but there is a path to citizenship, and that citizenship then gives you in a sense, a pretty powerful passport that will allow the family to go where they want. Okay. So, but the reality is, UK non-dom status was pretty sweet. There was nothing that compared to it in terms of the livability and the availability of a great tax regime where you did not pay tax on the money that your family made that was outside of the UK that was not brought into the UK, which was a fantastic arrangement. But it's over. It's not coming back, and so families have to reconsider. Next slide, please. So Canada, okay? So just everybody knows Canada. It's safe, it's beautiful, but the weather, it's cold. It is. The weather in the winter is awful. But one of the things that you have to remember is that many Canadians do not spend winters in Canada. We have an entire tradition of snowbirding, which is wealthy families or anybody who can afford it or anybody who can takes off from like right after Christmas till basically because Christmas is nice, it's very Christmassy,
Yeah.
but right after the holidays, everybody takes off until like March, okay, and goes someplace nice and warm and stays out of the cold. So it's not necessary for you to and even with even the bounds of trying to get your PR status and this other thing, the winter is not the deal breaker you think it is. Okay. Like I said, and supposedly very nice people, present company excluded, of course, but very nice people in general. Um, and is an open-minded liberal democracy. It can be a little too liberal for some people. It's Canada is very free, easygoing on a lot on virtual everything. But the big problem is there are high tax rates, but it's a very weird set of rules. I often say to people, it is very difficult to get rich in Canada, but it's actually very easy to be rich in Canada. Those are two very different things. Being rich and getting rich are two different things. So if the family has already made substantial wealth, then they're probably in a very good position from a tax perspective. So our overall story here is for the right family or the members of the right family with the right needs, i.e., they need a passport, they need mobility, and the right type of assets and the right forms of income, it can really be a good solution. Okay, neighbors. So I'm just going to go no comment on the neighbors, partly because part of my story is also that my wife is a career Canadian diplomat and I travel on a diplomatic passport. So
Ah,
I actually have to I cannot say anything for fear that anything I say might be might be
unleashed.
attributed to the Crown in right of Canada. So I can't really say anything. Very
Well,
much no
okay.
comment on the advice of counsel.
No,
No
oh
comment at
God.
this time.
And look, and I
So,
think, yeah, and that's fair. And I think, there's certain things that we don't talk about over the dinner table, right? Politics and religion. And certainly a lot of Canadians have a lot of American family members. This is certainly something that's going to drive a wedge between a lot of people. However, that said, it's important to kind of like look at it in terms of what's your safest bet right now? And there's a lot of turmoil going on and a lot of uncertainty. And I don't think that we're going to see an end to that in the next 4 years, 8 years. Like what's being done now in the US will have ramifications for a very, very long time. From a visa perspective, um, we're seeing a lot of reports out of the US where it is a very trying time to be an immigrant in that country. Lots of, even with green cards, et cetera, people are having really difficult times and having those kind of things taken away from them, at ports of entry. Canada does not do the same thing. And I don't see that happening for a long time here either. In saying that as well, I think we saw an announcement by the president in the US where he talked about having like that idea of a golden visa in the US. And from my understanding from my colleagues that work down there, that's not going to be something that's going to happen, right? I think those kind of large investment he talks about it, but whether or not it's going to be a possibility, and even if it is brought in, will it stay? Huge, huge, huge uncertainty across the board from both my perspective and I would imagine, Jonathan, from yours as well, if you were able to talk about it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I would say that the issue for high net worth families is always U.S. estate tax, right? You're going to
mhm,
lose 40% of your global wealth when you pass away if you're a U.S. U.S. person, which makes moving to the U.S. for wealthy families always something that they need to consider. Now, there's planning on the way in to try and stop it, but eventually you're going to get caught in the U.S. estate tax net, and it doesn't seem like that's going to go away anytime soon. So that there are a lot of people who move to the U.S., but there are reasons um, to reconsider that, and I think a lot of people are reconsidering that at the moment.
mhm,
So
for sure.
that's uh,
And we're seeing loads of reports, I think, of like, people getting out. So getting British passports, getting European passports, getting Canadian passports. All of a sudden, their granny from Canada is becoming really important. So yeah, that's an interesting trend to watch.
yeah.
Okay, so how do we do it? Right. So there's lots of different options. We're going to go through a few, none of them really in depth, but if you take away nothing except for the following for today, then I think it'll be a success. There are options. Those options are very much defined by the personal circumstances and family circumstances. But I would be optimistic in saying, or not optimistic, I would be honest in saying that there are plenty of options. We just need to find the one that fits for the right individual. So the way immigration works in Canada, we have an overall federal immigration system. However, each province and territory has their own immigration add-ons. So whatever we have on the federal scale, there may actually even be programs depending on the province that an individual would like to settle to. That's a little bit different. What I want to look at in terms of entrepreneur options are things like intercompany transfers. So again, we're very lucky to have very sexy names for our immigration programs, including C61, C62, C11, things that I don't expect any of you to remember. But they're out there. So really what it is you're looking at some intercompany transfer rules and regulations where you have companies who are based abroad, operating in more than one country outside of Canada, who then want to come and start up their business in Canada. The C61 is a way in, and the C62, C63 are ways that you can stay. A significant benefit work permits are where you have a business situation. And let's say you can't fall under the intercompany transfer. You're not set up in more than one country abroad, but you have a business idea that is either going to bring significant economic, social, or cultural benefits to Canada, then that is something that the government will really consider in bringing you here. This route, that C11, isn't something that directly leads to permanent residence, but after you have set up, you're hiring lots of individuals, you're innovative, you're creating a product that is becoming internationally renowned. It doesn't have to be, but really, really helps. There are ways for you to then maneuver how you stay so that you can eventually end up on a pathway to permanent residence. All of these options really are about planning, but they are about business ideas and how can we best use those ideas for the benefit of Canada. The startup visa, some of you may have heard about this program before. On the face of it, it looks fantastic. It really has to do with, a lot of it is built around tech and tech businesses. However, the reality of it is this is my least favorite program out there simply because the processing times for these things are nearly up on about 4 years. So again, with this one, it's a PR application straight off, even before you've come to Canada. But the idea behind it would be, again, planning, planning, planning. If there is an individual or family members or business partners who really have landed on something that's going to be really innovative in Canada and you want to plan ahead for this, sure, we can make it happen. You need to get involved with some sort of investor, be that a venture capital or an angel investor, but there's a possibility that you could have permanent residence on arrival here if we're able to kind of wait out that time. What I find interesting about it though is that in an environment, especially in the tech environment that moves really, really, really quickly, we have a processing time of a couple of years on this, and I don't understand that. I would expect to see that come down significantly over the coming months and years. But it's definitely a program to watch that I think could have huge benefit for families into the future. Other things that we need to look at as well are like free trade agreements and the IEC programs. So Canada has lots of trade agreements. The best one known is probably the CUSMA, Canada, US, Mexico agreement. Although depending on which country you're in, they put their own letters first. So it always sounds a little bit different. But it is really, really well known. It's really the moving the mobility between countries for participating countries, a lot of the time for professionals. So engineers, teachers, those kind of things. There's lots of mobility between countries depending on the agreements. IEC programs, those are interesting. And I'll go into one of the slides in a second. But basically, if you're between the ages of 18 and 35, and you're a national of one of the countries that are listed, there's pathways for work permits, which will then get you onto a road for having Canadian work experience, which will then drive you to permanent residence. You know, maybe not great for some of our wealthier older clients who are not into or not in that space where they're working right now, but maybe their children, it's a really worthwhile consideration. We do have lots of pathways to permanent residence. Like Jonathan mentioned earlier, they are we need to plan them. Immigration, which is the same in a lot of other countries, does change frequently. So we put our best foot forward when we enter the country. How do we enter? How we set our businesses up? How have we set ourselves up? How are we giving ourselves the best shot at permanent residence? Permanent residence is the tougher part of your application, but once that is done and it's achieved, you meet a certain residency criteria and you are on a path to citizenship. So I'm going to go through these in a little bit more detail, and Jonathan, feel free to jump in here. But really, when we're looking at how we set up the business, this is a definition of what is considered by Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada as a multinational corporation. And like I said earlier, the concept is your second business, or the fact that you are setting up in Canada is, you know, now I'm a multinational. No, that won't work. They want to see that you have business interests in more than one country abroad. That's what's going to push it into that multinational corporation. Coming here to set it up, then you're coming in as an executive, you're getting yourself started, you're getting the business organized. Those visas are usually given for 1 year. But once you have done what you said you were going to do, then we can move into an executive position on a further work permit for 3 years. Now, only if that's going to make business sense. So any of these business applications really have to be accompanied by really well thought out, very detailed business plans that we are working with as we're moving forward with these businesses. Must provide, so when you're looking at that, you know, moving into your executive role, okay, does the business actually require you, or are you just here for the work permit? So it's making sure that, you know, we're active in the day-to-day operations, but that the business can sustain having somebody at executive level in order to continue with it here. The C11, I love significant benefit applications. I love them even more because if we are outside of the larger centers, so Vancouver, Toronto, all the fun names, right? Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, etc., the bigger communities. If we move a little bit further out from there, those significant benefit applications really start to make a huge amount of sense. So one tech startup in Toronto, one-man show, is that going to have a significant benefit to Canada? I would say if you're setting up in Toronto, the answer is going to be no, right? But if you're setting up in a smaller community, but is maybe commutable to where you want to be in Toronto, by you setting up in that area, you're going to need to hire 1 or 2 Canadians maybe to service what your office needs. You're going to need to take on some marketing, different things, you know, like that goes around creating a business. Well, in that smaller community, you're going to have a way bigger impact than if you're in the middle of Toronto. So it's just something to kind of think about in terms of like when we look at these things, there's lots of innovation, the economic factors, but what are the social and cultural benefits to Canada permanent residents as well? So again, I think when it comes to those significant benefits, we can talk about a bigger impact in sometimes a smaller area, but that's only one factor. I mean, look, if your business idea involves quite a few more individuals and you're bringing in lots of investment into an area, absolutely we can do it in the bigger cities. I think it's really something that is flexible. There's no minimum income, no minimum capital required. It needs to make business sense. So with these applications, again, like I said, no real direct route to permanent residence. But if we're setting them up and running these kind of businesses the way that they're intended, we can really plan ahead to see how we can move people towards permanent residence by switching them around on different types of work permits.
Karen,
So I like this one. It's a, yep,
if you were bringing a franchise or investing in a franchise, would that meet these? So you've got, there's an
may,
existing business model, as it were.
yeah,
How does that fit?
maybe, right? And it's a
Yeah.
similar concept. It's like if you can put a business plan together to explain why this franchise, why now, why here, what's it going to do for the locality, what's it going to do, for the province and beyond. If we can make a really good business case for it, that's not restricted from this significant benefit application. Yeah.
And I would say that it's the kind of thing where if you meet with the local regional economic development officers in some pretty little town where you want to live, they will jump all over the opportunity to say yes, and so in a sense, it's about getting the community support behind you. For these sort of significant benefits. Now, if your plan is you just want to live in Vancouver and Toronto, well, it better be big because you're not
Yes.
going to move the ball and you're not going to get any attention. Whereas if you come to the little town of Red Deer and say, "Hey, I want to come to Red Deer and hire 10 people," wow, the local regional authority
Huge.
will be writing letters of support, and you'll get the mayor and the MP on your side and member of parliament on your side. So it's where you have to kind of pick your battles, right, and pick the right spot. So I think there's a ways and means to this, and that I think that's what we have to think about is what is your best plan. So it's generally sort of let's hear what the family story is, and then we'll game plan a game plan the immigration side of it based on what we think is going to work best. And this is going to be one of those options where, hey, like I said, if you want to live in Vancouver and Toronto, it better be a lot of money and better really make a splash. But in a small town, you're going to be a much bigger fish in a smaller pond. It's just that
Exactly,
simple.
exactly. And again, like it doesn't have to be the smallest towns in the world. It could be very commutable to the larger centers.
Oh,
And also,
well, like I think about Canmore, the number of UK people in Canmore, and it's
yeah,
just outside of Calgary. The number of UK people in Whistler, in these little towns, the number of UK people in just Barrie, north of, yeah, it's an hour from Toronto, by
they're incredible. Yeah.
yeah, by car or train. So, like there's all of these little towns that are just outside the periphery, that are very attractive, both from a livability, they're absolutely gorgeous, and and sustainability in terms of house prices not being not being what
Yep.
they are in the big cities, and then also but being connected to these larger urban centers. So
Yep.
that's the way we look at it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think I kind of said everything that I really needed to about the startup visa. In
Yeah.
theory, I love this program. Like the idea of it is really, really good. The practicality of it is a little bit harder.
But
When we
but
talk
but
about business moves fast. This program doesn't.
Karen, what I would say though is it doesn't is but the thing about startup visa is that these things are non-mutually exclusive. Like
Hmm.
you could apply for the startup visa for PR and then do the other
Do
one in
the
the
other
meantime,
stuff.
do the other stuff, and then 3 years later you get approved for this, and you all of a sudden your PR shows up, even
Right.
though you might not have gotten to that level along the other path, right? Like they're
Yeah.
not mutually exclusive. So we that's the other thing is you have to be creative about we're going to do this one and this one, and
Yeah.
that will help you because we might be able to sort of because if this one when the startup visa comes through, you're going to jump a step or two ahead if we do it, right? So you'll go
Hmm.
straight to PR. It might take 3 years, but you wouldn't be to PR in 3 years anyway, right?
Yeah.
So you'd still be on a visa. So your level of security would go up. So you can look at this as sort of like plan B, simultaneous plan B,
Yeah.
for many of the people who are doing those other ones. So yeah,
I agree. Like I said,
yeah,
not my first option, but in tandem with another plan, like this could work very well. So that
yeah,
significant benefit one that we talked about, yeah, we could do that and have this one on the side, processing in the background, right? So there,
yeah.
yeah, there's options, and again, it's all dependent upon individuals, their circumstances, and how we can make it work. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is kind of what I was talking about earlier with those international agreements, right? So don't freak out, lots of words on the slide here. Um, so we have lots of trade agreements. What I think is one that really is untapped, and I think I'd love to see more of, is the CETA one. So this is our free trade agreement with Europe. Obviously, I look at them from an immigration perspective, so I have no idea what else is in them, but I love them. I think that there's a lot of programs that we can move individuals, companies, and businesses through these free trade agreements. So, opening up opportunities for work permits and permanent residence later on. Now, permanent residence itself doesn't flow from these free trade agreements, but they open the door to get you in, depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it. There's a lot of them that are interesting. The Panama one it covers quite a lot. And obviously, who knows what's going to happen with the Kuzma one, which I don't think I've even written here. Lovely. Oh, I did. So those are great. So again, depending on what's your family makeup, what passports do you have? And we can really look at that then and kind of go, okay, how can we leverage that under these trade agreements? How would these make sense?
Yeah.
There's lovely ones as well that I like called lovely. Sorry, I could use a better phrase for that. But like independent professionals, right? So where, you're coming on a contract with another company, you've got a work permit maybe for 2 or 3 years, providing those independent professional services. Lots of options, again, depending on who you are and what you're doing. That youth mobility section that I have, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but these are for people who already have mobility in their passport, right? So there's a lot of countries in the
True,
world
yeah.
that aren't on this list where people are non-doms in the UK and they just don't have mobility because that passport just doesn't allow them to do it. So this is, for many of the families who already have these type of passports, the mobility option isn't the thing. It becomes
Are
also a
wide
tax
open.
play, right? So that's sort of the combination, but I do agree the youth ones for that next generation, for that generation that's been, born in, that for mom and dad who don't have a passport, but for that next generation who has a passport, there can be a lot of mobility opportunities. So
yeah, and that youth mobility 18 to 35, it's a great one to look at for that younger generation. Like I was talking about earlier, permanent residence is attainable. It really is. The best way to permanent residence in Canada is really having, work experience here. So the importance of getting your foot in the door is huge. It really can't be understated. What we would like to happen is that, you get through a permanent residence pathway like what we call express entry. It really is based on factors and points and criteria, but really what it is the younger you are, the more highly educated you are. And if you have a couple of years of high level experience, you're a really, really good candidate for permanent
and
residence.
kids.
Yeah,
It's a bit of a national Ponzi scheme, okay?
you're
Married
right.
with kids, speak English and French, professionals, you're in. And I mean
Well,
in as a yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
what we've seen actually, and this is something I don't have on here, but French is so important right now. So if you are from a country, visa required or whatever, right? You have trouble with your mobility. If you can speak French, Canada wants you. There's a whole other work permit section where you can just show, I am able to speak French. Here's my passport. Off you go. It's incredible. Like right now, if you can speak French, Canada's an open door. Yeah. So that's huge. And so if some of you have clients out there wondering what are we going to do, at a minimum,
Yeah.
start learning French. It's going to be very, very helpful to come to Canada.
Yeah.
And yeah, we see that throughout. Like it's crazy. I don't know where really it's come from. So Canada
On that
technically,
point,
yeah.
Karen, I mean, say there's a lot of West Africa that speaks French. High net worth clients there might not realize there's such an option, perhaps. Or
Oh,
where do you see the main francophone outside of France? Where would you see the most French speakers accessing that kind of option?
yeah, coming through what I have seen, you're dead right. It's West
Mm.
African. Randomly, like, I think they can't even realize the opportunities that they're having. And what we even see is like clients who maybe are working on the lower skilled range, they're getting to permanent residence quicker than somebody with a PhD, right?
Mm.
So because of that ability to speak French. So honestly, right now in the immigration landscape in Canada, if you can speak French, it's your golden ticket. Yeah, which is crazy. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Open door.
But
Ish.
but the interesting
Open door
part is you
ish.
don't have to open door ish, but the thing is you don't have to live in Quebec in order to do that because
Well, you
there's
can't live in
because
Quebec. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
So the criteria is that you're outside of Quebec. Yeah.
Yeah, the criteria is that you're outside of Quebec, but also there's enough French language and French immersion schools in the rest of Canada, where your kids can continue to learn French even as they live in a completely English and Anglo environment around there. So it doesn't mean that you're sort of even giving up that opportunity. But I think what it comes to is there's a lot of smaller francophone communities scattered throughout Canada. Anywhere in Alberta, there are little French towns where everybody speaks
Hmm.
French. And part of this is supposedly sort of support all throughout Nova Scotia, or all throughout New Brunswick, all throughout Manitoba, in particular, and even in Alberta, there are small little francophone communities that just want to be supported, and that's why it's an open door. So that's
Hmm.
one of the ways. And like I said, the provincial programs are provincial sponsorship. One of the funnier ones is if you go to Calgary, every other policeman is from the UK. If you get stopped by the police, the odds are they're going to have an English accent. Okay.
Yeah.
Simply because there's a specific Alberta, and we were talking about this last night, entryway for policemen into Alberta because they
Yeah.
need more policemen who have sort of, especially UK policemen, because of the very similarities in the procedural process, human rights. There's a way to be a policeman that has been ingrained in a UK policeman that fits into the Canadian, police way of doing things, right?
Hmm.
So just because the history of the RCMP, it's a very English style, constable focused system. So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, if your spouse is a police person, you're in
Yeah.
Alberta.
Yeah.
So there's all of these little ways and pathways that you can't, that are non-obvious. So we always have to think about it. So yeah. And
Yeah.
then, oh, sorry,
I,
then go on.
no, no, no. And it just speaks to the variety. So although we have federal programs, so it's one size fits all, there's carve outs for individuals given particular circumstances. And like each province does something different. So like again with Alberta, I talk about Alberta because I'm here and my experience is here. But they have a program that's been really thoroughly enjoyed by the more rural communities. So it's a rural entrepreneur program where there's a list of designated communities. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur in that community and the community is going to support you, it's a route to permanent residence that doesn't exist in the rest of Canada, right? Other provinces have their own other versions of this. But again, like we look at the people, we look at the role, we look at where they want to go, make immigration fit for the circumstances. But again, the opportunity is 100% there. What I want to talk about for permanent residence, though, is like there's a residency obligation to maintain that permanent residence. So it's about 730 days in the 5 years. However, if you want to get to Canadian citizenship, you have to show 1,095 days living in Canada in the 5 years prior to applying for citizenship. At a minimum, you need to have held permanent residence for 2 years. So if you're able to and what it does is it freezes your timeline from the day you make that citizenship application. So once you file the citizenship application, you can trot off anywhere you want in the world. So for a small period of time to make it your main country of residence, again, tax considerations aside, that will get you very quickly to citizenship and to that elusive Canadian passport.
Yeah. And at the same time, we're talking about 365 days over 5 years. So that's close to, like, 1,800 days. So you have to spend, 1,100 out of 1,800 days in Canada. So that means you can still go someplace warm for the winter. And
Yeah,
it will slow you down, but
yeah,
it doesn't mean that you can't, like, avoid the winter completely if you don't if that's a problem for you. But like I said, most people are, like I said, I don't mind the winter during the holidays, but then after that, I'd prefer to be anywhere else, even though
yeah.
I've lived my whole life. Most
Do you know
Canadians
what,
are the same way. Many
Jonathan?
many older Canadians
That's
disappear for 3 months. It's just part of the way of life. So.
Yeah. And you know what's funny? Like that really is a matter of perspective, right? So I love the winter here because it is not gloomy, it is not wet, it is not damp to your bones, right? You can get out and
Oh,
walk in
especially in
like
Alberta.
minus 20.
But you're forgetting it's minus 25
Yeah.
and dry
But
as a bone. It's
yeah,
minus 25, but
yeah,
it's totally dry. And
it's
sunny.
lovely.
It's
Yes.
sunny and minus 25 in
Yeah.
Alberta. Great
It
skiing
is.
weather.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is, right? So, like I said, it's all about perspective, right? I'm Irish, so all it did for us during the winter was rain. So this is novelty 10 years later, right? But I get it, and then all the locals are taking off right down to Palm Springs or Arizona for the winter. But no, the rest of us are like, this is lovely. Anyway, it is what it is. Okay, so that's kind of it for with citizenship and those kind of things. But it's important to know, like I said, if you take away nothing else, opportunity, 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 it's here.
Yeah. So now onto the tax side. After all the fun immigration stuff, now onto the boring tax stuff. So very first thing about why Canada is a great place to, as I say, a great place to be rich, high tax rates on ordinary income. So as a consequence, kind of hard to get rich, but it's a great place to be rich. The very first one, and it's a great passport to have if you are rich, because once you get that Canadian passport, you can leave Canada with your Canadian passport. And they've also changed the rules so that your grandchildren are still Canadian citizens, even if your children were born outside of Canada and your grandchildren were born outside of Canada, they are all still citizens of Canada. So it runs down through the family now. So you are citizens for 3 generations forward, even if you never come back to Canada after the day you get your citizenship. Okay. So, and there's no taxation on death as a result of citizenship like there is in the US. If you become a US person, you've got a tax, collar around your neck for the rest of your life and for your children's lives and for everybody's life. Okay. The other issue here is what we would call granny trusts. And granny trusts are the greatest, are the gift that keeps on giving. Effectively, if your family money is granny's money, it's outside of Canada, and that could include the UK, as long as the money is outside of Canada and the wealth is non-Canadian, and you're going to be inheriting it, or it's actually in a second, one generation up from the people coming from Canada, so long as the family wealth is put into a trust that is outside of Canada and the person coming to Canada didn't generate that wealth and doesn't contribute to the trust. And we'll get into this in four, but it's basically tax-free wealth for the rest of everybody's life down through the generations. Next one. Okay, so the next one is active business income of controlled foreign affiliates. If the family has family businesses outside of Canada, which is as we were talking about, with this fits in with this multinational enterprise concept, then the way Canadian tax works is you only pay tax on the dividends paid to the resident of Canada. You don't have to pay tax on active business income that's earned outside of Canada. Okay. Next core issue, step up on immigration. If your family is worth $100 million on the day that you arrive in Canada, your tax cost of those assets for Canadian tax purposes is $100 million. If you sell any of those assets and live on them while you get your citizenship, your tax in Canada on that is zero. Zero, because you had that when you came. Everything you come with is tax-free. Okay. Okay. So then if you happen to have a bunch of passive assets that throw off a bunch of taxable income, we have a structure that we use, which is called, private placement life insurance, where we can take, let's say, bonds and stocks and all these other things that you already have that throw off a ton of income that would be attributable to you. We will put those into a life insurance policy outside of Canada before you arrive. And guess what? No taxation on any of that during your time that you're in Canada. Okay. Um, and um, and you can basically mix and match all the above depending on the family, so that as a non-dom, you were paying this big flat fee and then you were paying tax in the UK on the money you brought in. In Canada, you don't have the flat fee and you might not be paying tax even on the money you bring in. Some of it, yes, but a lot of it, maybe no. So you could be, as a family, more tax efficient in Canada than you were in the UK as a non-dom, which is not something a lot of people understand. So moving right along, next slide, please. So this is just a diagram. This is part of what I do. I draw these diagrams and I set them up. We set up the structure. We put the businesses elsewhere. We do all kinds of things to build businesses. This is an example of just the kind of structure that we build. And so we've got Canada, the US, offshore, all the stuff. This is just an example, moving right along. Okay, so as I said, no estate tax in Canada. We have a deemed disposition on death. So when you die, you're deemed to have sold everything, but you're deemed to have sold everything, and then you pay a capital gains tax of roughly 25% on the increase in value while you were a tax resident of Canada. So if you come with a family portfolio of $100 million that you own and you were to die and it was worth 110, you would only pay tax in Canada on the 10, the extra. Okay. So that's and so but you get step up on arrival. The other thing is that if you do leave Canada, you would have to pay a deemed disposition on departure. Leaving Canada is like dying. But if you're only in Canada for 5 or 6 or 7 years to get the passport, then that's really the only gain that you would have to pay. But here's the interesting part. You don't even have to pay it when you leave. There's a whole process of putting up security. So you don't even have to pay the tax until sometime later when you actually have the cash to pay it. So it's, yes, we have a deemed disposition on departure, but it's not as bad as you think. Next slide. Okay, I'm just talking about two types of trust here. This is the structure of a granny trust. On the left-hand side here is basically to make sure it's very clear that an asset protection trust is where the beneficiary or settler of the trust puts the money in, and they're already in Canada. That's basically for asset protection purposes. We do a lot of asset protection trusts, and they're very useful in Canada, particularly if they're outside of Canada. We do a lot of that work for wealthy Canadians. It exists, it's a thing, but really for the beneficiary of people who are coming to Canada, the most unused, massively underused, massively underrealized structure is the use of a granny trust, particularly where the wealth is in the generation beforehand. So, and for even within the granny trust, for example, let's say the person coming to Canada isn't going to inherit the wealth until after their parents pass away, then we set up a trust that exists outside of Canada and we put it on the shelf, and then we just arrange it so that the inheritance doesn't go direct to the Canadian, it goes to the trust outside of Canada. That also works. So effectively, you inherit the money, it goes to a trust outside of Canada. That trust does not pay tax in Canada. And although there's a little bit of magic involved, but it's well known and well documented, you effectively never pay tax in Canada on the family wealth that's held in the granny trust outside of Canada. Even when you bring that money to Canada, you still don't pay tax on it. So you effectively can live in Canada on the family wealth tax-free forever. Yes, it's true. And it's massively underused. Massively. Okay. So, but the
Um,
next slide. Next slide.
yeah, and Jonathan, I think that probably should have been the title for the
Yeah.
presentation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Never pay
Okay.
tax ever.
Never, ever pay tax. Okay. So, but the key consideration is the Canadian cannot make any contribution. That includes services. So you can't have the Canadian manage the assets in the portfolio. You can't have them do anything. You basically have to put that in professional hands and keep your nose out of it. You can be informed. You can talk to the investment people. You can talk to them about it. You can express your opinion, but you cannot control it. That is the critical component, and that is the hardest thing for people to do. That is where people get into trouble. They say, yes, it's offshore. Yes, I have nothing to do with it, but I basically trade it all day long. No, that doesn't work. You can't do that. And that is the toughest part of this whole thing. But it is a completely compliant, it is a completely disclosed structure. The Canadian government knows all about it. It is not something where it's non-transparent. It's 100% transparent. You're filing tax returns. You're doing everything. Okay. And that is the thing about it, is completely a compliant structure. We're going to keep on going. We don't have time. We don't have time. Okay, so that's Granny Trust tax-free income for Canada forever. There we go. Next. Okay. Yeah, stop there. Okay, so basically what we do is if the family has operating businesses, even the Canadians, if they're resident in Canada, we set up a Canadian parent company, and then we put all of the assets and all the businesses underneath that structure. And effectively, that whole structure can work and can be function and can be managed and can be dealt with. And the only money that the Canadians would pay tax on would be dividends from the Canadian parent company to the shareholder at the top. That's the only thing that you ever pay tax on. So if all these other companies go on making money, so long as they're active businesses. Now, the definition of active business is very complicated. It cannot be those passive assets we are talking on, like stocks, bonds, properties that you just earn rent on. But real estate development is an active business. Lending money to your other businesses is an active business. This takes a lot of planning, a lot of advice, but basically you really don't pay tax except on the money that you take into your own personal hands from your businesses. That's it. Next slide. Moving right along. We want to make sure we have time. I already talked about the step up on immigration. So the big thing that you have to remember here is that if you arrive in Canada with wealth, including latent capital gains on assets when you leave the UK. Now, I did the work last night. They've changed the rules. If you leave the UK with a bunch of money You don't necessarily pay an exit tax on the way out of the site, out of the UK. There's rules and complexities, and you talk to your UK advisor. But effectively, you have a bunch of latent wealth around the world. You arrive, you don't pay tax when you leave the UK on it. If you don't, there might be reasons why you might, but there's reasons why you don't. But you arrive in Canada, full step up on that. That's your money. That's your tax. You get what we call an adjusted cost base equal to your fair market value as of your date of arrival. So valuing your assets on arrival is a great way to make sure you don't pay tax on any of that money ever in Canada. Next slide. There is a deemed disposition on departure. It does happen if you do leave Canada, you get the passport, you decide to move on, you're going to go someplace else. You have to realize that you're going to pay capital gains tax on the amount of the value of your assets, the difference between the value of your assets when you arrive and the value of your assets when you depart, but not on the.
Jonathan, when you say when you depart, like what do you mean? Like how do we know
Well,
we've like
Well, I would say on that, so if somebody comes in and they spend the time and they get their passport and then they decide they want to move to any place else in the world and they have the Canadian passport and they're Canadian citizen, they can come and go as they see fit, and they leave Canada, become a tax non-resident of Canada
Mhm.
with a passport, deemed disposition on departure if you leave
Okay,
Canada permanently to do that. But like I said, you don't have to
hard
pay
to
the tax
prove.
when you leave because you can put up security to
Mhm.
say, like, you can just say, oh, well, I'll pay it when I have the money. I'll pay it next Tuesday when I happen to have the money, or actually sell the asset. So you don't have to, it's not an immediate cash tax cost. It's an eventual tax cost on the gain, on the increase in the value of your assets while you're resident in Canada. So next slide. Okay. Passive income. Oh, I can go on for about 3 hours on this, but so effectively what
I'll
we're
give you two
doing,
minutes.
I got it. Well, I do. I'm going to go to, well, less than that. Effectively, your family has a bunch of stocks and bonds and portfolio assets. We're going to throw that in a life insurance policy, and you're not going to pay tax on that either. But that doesn't mean that you can't borrow against, that doesn't mean that the trust that's in the middle there can't borrow money from a bank that happens to be owned by the trust company, because most trust companies are owned by banks at very efficient rates, and that the trust can't lend you money based on the fact that everybody dies and the life insurance policy is going to be paid, and eventually the bank is going to get their money. So the trust can then also lend you money, and borrowing money from a trust is also not taxable income. So if you have a bunch of portfolio and it just sits in the policy and grows, you can just run up a debt while you're alive, not pay tax on that in Canada, and then and then when you die, the life insurance pays the trust pays back the bank, and then anything else can go to your beneficiaries and your family in Canada tax free. So again, even if you have a bunch of portfolio assets, you can live in Canada tax free because your assets are rising, you run up a debt, you knock them out when you die. So live here tax free. Okay. So that's why it matters. Next slide. Moving right along. Keep going. Next slide. Next slide. Case studies. Okay, so we have missed. So now we get into the fun stuff. So we tried to create this family, and if we have like 2 seconds at the end, I have another sort of situation to talk about. But this is Mr. and Mrs. Ook. It's UK, but we're just going to call them the Ooks. Okay, and Mr. and Mrs. Ook are UK non-doms. They have they have 4 adult children. The youngest was born in the UK, so the youngest is a UK resident, but the other 3 before they arrived, they're UK non-doms. They own a significant hotel business outside of the UK that has hotels in multiple countries, but they have a couple of UK places as well, inside of the global business. They have you know, they have some assets in the UK, like a house and some investment account, but the family wealth was inherited and the income is generated outside the UK. So they have also a passive portfolio outside of the UK, a very big one. But unfortunately, Mr. and Mrs. Ook are from a country that requires visas to travel anywhere, and they have no other citizenships, as do the 3 older children who arrived with them. So they're UK non-doms, but they don't have 3 out of their 4 kids have a passport from a country that you really can't move around on very well. Okay, that's just the general case. Okay, so next slide. So the oldest is an executive in the family business. The second oldest is a struggling artist who loves fashion, but is married to an ophthalmologist. Okay, the third oldest is a grad student in nanocomputer systems engineering with a minor in applied math. And the youngest is in undergrad, what we would call, first year university, second year university in business. Okay. So, Karen,
Yes,
now
sir.
when you think about this, I'm just going to say for the family. Okay. Now, if on one of the visas, let's say Mr. Ook is it's the same thing for let's say Mr. Ook is still active. He might not be retired yet, or he's chairman of the board, or has a
Hmm.
pretty senior position. It would not be difficult for this family in this case to buy a couple of hotels in Canada. Okay.
Yep.
The family has the wealth. That's not a problem. They could sell a hotel in someplace else and buy another one in Canada if they didn't want to, if they had the cash, they could borrow the money. They could go walk into a bank in Canada and get a loan to buy a hotel. Okay. And if their business isn't
Yep.
hotels, it's something else, it's even easier. I just made up this one because it was so they could do that. So they've bought a couple of hotels in Canada. So what for the oldest and for the other one, what could we what could we do?
Well, straight off, you're looking at that concept of setting up the business here in Canada, right? So you purchase the assets, but you need to be here to set up that business. So as the executive, and he has clear background experience in running and managing the business, having him here under that C61, that intercompany transfer, as somebody who has that specialized knowledge in the business who's able to set it up, he would get his 1 year work permit, right? Once it's set up, then we can apply for him to remain here as an executive working for the business. And you know what? Because if dad's involved in the business as well and he's still active in it, possibly he could also come separately, not on that first 1 year permit, but as a genuine intercompany transferee, depending on how he's working with the business. But for the eldest son, absolutely, doors open for him. Then his spouse and his
And
family.
remember, I said oldest, not son. It could be
Oh, sorry, the oldest child,
non-gender specific in
non-gender.
Canada
Yeah,
because
no,
we really
sorry,
don't care.
yeah. Right. So yeah, so basically that's an open door. It's an invitation. I won't say it's an open door. Look, there's work that needs to go into it. It needs to be planned. It's possible. Yeah, he could absolutely, he or she, have that route into Canada. Like I said, for them, their spouse and their children.
Okay. And now the second oldest, even though they're a struggling artist, the fact that they're married to an ophthalmologist, I think creates an opportunity and
Absolutely.
but
And
a little
and
bit
it's
of a
similar
problem as
to
well,
yeah, it's similar to
right?
my own story, right? So, when we look at the family, we're not just looking at the immediate family, it's also spouses and outwards. In this case, our struggling artist, that's lovely. He does not have a route on his own, or she does not have a route to immigrate to Canada without a job offer or something else. However, the ophthalmologist, being in a healthcare field, will have a really good route because they're so employable here. So with a job offer, that person will be able to bring spouse and children to come and work as well. And when I say is able to bring a
So,
spouse, the spouse will have a work permit too.
yeah. So when you say the ophthalmologist, now what about the issue of cross qualifications?
Yeah, it sucks. Sorry, for want of a better phrase. So, and I do expect though this is something that's going to get better over the next little while, right? So what we're seeing in Canada at the moment is an internal move for credential recognition across the provinces. So right now we're really bad with internal mobility for different professions, et cetera, et cetera. And it's worse even when you're coming from outside of Canada. So if this is a move that this family are wanting to make, my strongest piece of advice is get the credential assessments done, started in good enough time that when we're ready to make the move, we've got everything ready to go. Yeah, it's
Okay.
not a
Okay.
straightforward
And
process.
I would also say that ophthalmologists, if they want to move to a smaller center,
Huge. Yeah. You're going to have multiple job offers. Yeah. And
and more
immigration will follow your feet.
and you're going to get support from local MPs, from the local Chamber of Commerce, from the local Business
Yeah.
Development Association. That's all going to play in. Okay. So
Healthcare, I think across Canada right now, if you're anything to do in healthcare, they want you. We need you. Alberta needs you. If there's anybody out there who's in healthcare, we'll take you.
yeah.
But that's what it is. And there's huge support for it, both from local, but also from immigration, on a
Okay.
bigger perspective.
Yeah. And the third oldest is a grad student in nanocomputer system engineering with a minor in applied math. What did you say about that?
Oh, I love this person. So again, like in engineering, with that type of knowledge, a work again having a job offer, so working your connections, you will find that there's a really booming industry here that will support that employment and that training. But again, as well here as an engineer, there's requirements for being engineers too here. So again, it's the looking into your credential assessments, looking into how do you get down that path of being qualified and recognized here. But for sure, the work permit options are there from a job offer, but also, if they have a good business idea on their own and they want to get something set up, you're looking at those significant benefit ones too. With a background like this, that's a possibility.
What about the undergrad in business? Very wrapping it up. I
Undergrad
don't
in
know.
business, I'd look into whether he wants to do a postgrad here.
Yeah.
Because then that will open up the door for, like, he could do maybe a study permit for 2 or 3 years to do his postgrad, and then he or she would qualify for a postgraduate work permit. And again, gets you on that pathway towards permanent residence by looking at one of the more important things, which is Canadian experience. Yeah.
Okay. So we're a little bit over time here, but I'm going to ask you. But the key is, let's say mom and dad don't qualify for any of these things. How do we get mom and dad into Canada once? What happens with any of these kids once they've
Well, you
been
know
here?
what? Once these kids get to, like, the door really opens for mom and dad once one of these kids get to permanent residence, right? In which point, mom and dad can apply for a super visa, which is an eligible visa for them to come and go from Canada from anywhere from 5 to 10 years. So that's really what opens the door. There's also immigration programs. They're not great right now, but we have a parent and grandparent scheme where you can apply for permanent residence for your parent if you are a permanent resident. Now, it's very limited, but it's one to watch. In the interim, the super visa is there to bridge that gap. Yeah, they can't
Okay.
work while they're here, but they don't need to, right?
Yeah. And so for this family, like I said, on the tax side, doing all the options, they would be super tax efficient. With that super visa, they would still become tax residents of Canada, but because they're not paying tax on any of the global family wealth, it's a very good position to be in. That's our story. And that's the story, and I'm sticking to it. So that's it. I don't know if there are any questions. I know we're at 1 minute over. What do you say, David?
We don't have any questions, but I had one. Is like just briefly. Where do you see things going wrong? What's the main, like, are there real cardinal sort of sins on the tax side or on the immigration side that you see repeated, or is there any trends in the errors you see people making? Go for
Okay.
it, Jonathan.
Number one mistake, don't tell is not telling the Canadian authorities how much money you have. People tend to be quiet about not want to tell the authorities about how much money they have. That's the biggest mistake. Number one thing that you can do wrong is lie on your application for citizenship. One of the things you have to put on that is your global wealth and how much money you have. So don't lie on your Canadian application. That's the one thing you can get kicked out of the country for. Never do that. So full disclosure is the only way to go. Okay. That's the
Yeah.
other one. The other one is control. There are certain, like the business empire, you can control. The passive assets, you can't. So some families have problems with, oh, I want to have it with professionals, but I still want to call the shots. You can't do it. You have to sort of let the professionals do what they do. That's the other one. On the immigration side, what do you say, Karen?
Uh, on the immigration side, biggest thing I see is, people thinking that it's an easy process, I can do it myself. But I also find, Jonathan, 100% it's being transparent. If we say things or we willingly omit things on immigration applications at the beginning, that will come around and bite you in the bum later on. So, and I find, like, in these situations, like where we have plenty of wealth and assets outside of the country, in actual fact, declaring those will help with immigration because they want to see on those first initial entries, what are your ties to your countries outside of Canada? When we can show more ties abroad, the likelihood that you're going to leave when you said you were going to leave becomes higher and easier for immigration to quantify. So it actually is helpful. More so, please don't hide it. Tell us about it so we can show them that ultimately you're not going to be here forever and ever and ever, even if
Well,
once you
and
land, the plan
ultimately,
is you
you're
are.
not going to be a liability to the
Huge.
Canadian taxpayers. You're going to be an asset, and that's the biggest one. Is at the end of the day, what are you going to be a net asset to the country? Even if your money doesn't become an asset in Canada, even if you don't pay tax here, you're still going to be a net asset. So that's
Fantastic.
Mhm.
Well, thank
yeah.
you so much for a great hour, Jonathan. Look forward to seeing you in London in the summertime. And yeah, thank you both for a fascinating hour.